Chris, far forward.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to take a call on this third reading of the Parole Amendment Bill after the contribution sponsored by Cricinfo from the member on the other side of the House. Look, parole is a very loaded topic. It's one where on all sides of the equation I think you try and strike a balance, and that may mean that people around that conversation may not get everything they want, but I think in this instance the balances that have been sought have been found, and after some pretty good work at the Select Committee as well, Mr Speaker. Those balances are around the rights of victims, and we've heard a lot of talk around the re-victimisation for victims of having to go through unnecessary parole hearings. If people at home are watching, and I've as a former member of the Law and Order Select Committee of the 50th Parliament, I was on a trip to Christchurch Prison, and prisoners do watch Parliament. And because someone came up to me and said, I liked your contribution to some piece of corrections legislation. So they will be keeping an eye on our contributions, and they will be watching us. So for those at home or who aren't at home and who are incarcerated, the Parole Board every 12 months basically has to consider you for parole. And as we've heard from other submissions from speakers during this debate, a lot of those hearings are unnecessary. I believe that the Law and Order Select Committee during the submissions heard from the Parole Board that sometimes it took 2 or 3 or 4 appearances before the Parole Board before the person before them was seriously considered to be worthy of being considered for parole. So if you are on both sides of that equation, Mr Speaker, either as a victim or as an offender or an inmate, a lot of that time would be just a waste of time or reliving a pretty nasty experience. So from that perspective, we think the ability to move the time frame of the minimum of 12 months between parole hearings out to 2 years is a good thing to make sure that you don't have the unnecessary parole board hearings that we've seen. Now, can I step onto the victim's side of the equation here and say that, you know, if the offending was serious, and I know that there were submissions from the likes of the Sensible Sentencing Trust. I don't always necessarily agree with everything that what they've got to say, but I think they make a worthy contribution at these kinds of times. There is a sense that if they know that the person up for parole isn't going to be granted parole, then that makes every 12 months pretty difficult for those victims, having to relive the ordeal that they've gone through or what their loved ones have gone through is a very, very difficult experience. And I don't think we as a Parliament or the officials who overlook this process want to unnecessarily put victims through that kind of stress, through that kind of torment every 12 months. So I think, and that's why, and we think on this side of the House, which is why we are supporting this legislation, that the 2-year window extension for a maximum for a parole hearing is a wise move. It will save around, we've told, about 800 parole hearings per year, which is roughly, I think, about somewhere close to 10 or 15%. So it is a significant amount. But also, I think the caveat there is that there is, I guess, an enticement there for offenders that if they do meet some, and it's called in the legislation, I think it was changed to relevant activity, if they do behave or if they do meet some relative, some milestones, that they will be reconsidered for parole earlier. So I guess that's the trade-off that you do have in this legislation. Someone may come up and the Parole Board may say, well, you're not ready and we don't think you're ready. You're going to have to wait 2 years until we reconsider your application for parole. But if that inmate goes away and says, I don't want to wait 2 years, and they're of the mind to go and get themselves back onto something like a drug and alcohol rehabilitation scheme, and they do good work, they have the ability, if they meet the criteria before that 2 years up, or whatever the time frame is that the Parole Board might meet, might rule, to do the work to be considered earlier for parole. And I think that strikes a good balance in terms of saying to a person, you're not ready yet, But if we go away and meet these objectives over the next 12 to 24 months, then you will be considered for parole. Mr Speaker, there is some international research that I think that the Law and Order Select Committee was privy to that basically said that if someone serves out their whole sentence, their likelihood of reoffending is higher than someone who may have been rehabilitated and been given parole earlier. So I think given that kind of finding from the international studies, that what we're doing here is a pretty important thing to make sure we bring down recidivism rates as well. Because again, another one of the things that we're trying to balance here is reoffending after those inmates have been either given parole or they've served their sentence. I know that members of the Law and Order Select Committee got to sit through some parole hearings. I think the parole, being on the parole board would be quite a thankless task. It's one of those jobs where, like other judges or rugby referees or cricket umpires, you have to be perfect on day one and get better after that. And I think the way that they have to operate and weigh up all the risks of someone who has looked to rehabilitate and their risk of reoffending is something that I don't think the general public would appreciate. Of course, we all hear when things go wrong and when someone who is being given parole has reoffended, but I think, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, that on the whole the decisions and the rigorous decisions of the parole board are ones that are pretty good. Mr Speaker, my colleague Potter Williams did speak about the kind of support that inmates need after release. And it's one thing for us to say you need to rehabilitate yourself and meet certain milestones while you're in prison, but I think it's very important to make sure that they don't reoffend once they leave prison, that the kind of support that we give them after they leave prison. It's easy for us to say, you've done it, you've ticked the box here, out you go into society, but it's not that easy. And there will be some people who say, no, you shouldn't give them any support after you leave. But I believe that if we're going to put within this legislation some milestones for them to meet, and that could give them the possibility of getting out of prison earlier, we need to make sure that there's support to them after they leave. So these people who have offended, and some of it will be serious offending, Mr Speaker, don't re-offend again. We can't just chuck them out into society and think everything is going to be hunky-dory. It's not always that way. And especially if we're, in one sense, fast-tracking their exit from prison. So I would hope that the government, when it thinks about resourcing, the likes of the probation service, thinks about the kind of flow-on effects that this kind of policy has, Mr Speaker, because we can't just front-load it and try and make everything good while they're in prison and then forget the issue when their name's not on the whiteboard anymore and they're out in society. I hope that we're wise and we're very prudent to make sure that there is support for them out in the community. Mr Speaker, I think we need to give credit where credit's due, and having been through quite a few prisons and seen some of the work that's going on in the drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs, I think a lot of good work has been done. We need to, I think we've all got a vested interest in making sure that there's less offending, there are fewer people in our prisons, because as Bill English has said, they're both a fiscal and moral failure. We don't want to be spending billions and billions of dollars on incarcerating people. I think we, want to make sure they're all contributing members of society. But the fact is, there are people who we need to rehabilitate. Good work is being done now, but through this legislation, I hope the government can realise we need to do more for those offenders in order to make sure there are fewer victims.
I understand this call will be a split call between national members, and I call